Welcome to Wine Talks with Paul Kalemkiarian, where we peel back one label, one bottle, and one cork at a time, the wine business, and always sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, where we sport the Pure Wine Club, where we feature biodynamic, easy for you to say, and organic wines solely. This is an interesting day for me because I woke up, I was going to come to work, and I had a million things to do, but fortunately, I have the opportunity to have Eric Perrin here. I want to say ici, but from Château Carbonnieux, and this was like, for me, a great memory for me, because I'm positive when I took over the company in 1988, somewhere in the next couple of years, I featured the 1986 or 88 Château Carbonnieux. But welcome, Eric, for coming in and having a chat with us. I'm so glad to have you here.
My pleasure. Thank you to invite me.
Directly from Bordeaux. Did you just get here today?
Yesterday. I arrived yesterday, so from Bordeaux.
You're tired.
No, I'm okay.
Oh, okay, good. Were you part of the tour? Now, I also have Thomas Coutier from Duclos, is the importer of the wine that we're going to talk about today in the Chateau. And I was depressed because I could not join him on this recent tour of Bordeaux. Did you guys go to Carbonnieux when you were there?
We did. We did
wow.
visit, yes.
So.
And it was Eric's son.
It was Mark that received Thomas and the group of Duclos last week in
Was
Carbonnieux.
he a good boy, or did he act up on it?
We met this morning.
Oh. He was not there to verify.
I was not there. No, I was in fact last week traveling in North Europe, so in Scandinavia, and going back to Bordeaux on Friday evening.
So you have, we're going to talk about all these things, and I try not to jump around, but let's kind of start with the beginning of the chateau. I read that it was one of the oldest chateaux in France.
Yes, we have a long history because we are located in the south part of Bordeaux in a small appellation that actually is called Pessac-Léognan. But this appellation on one way is full of contradiction because we are in the oldest area producing wine in Bordeaux, because it was the Roman, close to 20 centuries ago, that started the culture of the vine in the south part of Bordeaux, and Pessac-Léognan was born due to the impulsion of a winemaker called André Lurton in the mid of the 80s, exactly in 1987, so 30 years ago.
Yes.
And at this time, to give you some information about our area, the size of Pessac-Léognan, I apologize, I will talk you in hectares. It was 800 hectares.
So like 350 acres.
And close to an appellation like Pomerol or like Saint-Julien. And we had some people that came invest, and in 30 years, the size of the appellation become the double.
Really?
So 1,600 hectares of vine.
For the whole, all chateau in Pessac-Léognan.
And more or less 1,400 in red and 200 in white. And Carbonnieux, so in the family of the classified growth of Grave, and represents 100 hectares, so 240 acres, with the half in red and the half in white, and were classified for the two colors.
So that's interesting, and I read that too, that it's half red and half white. And of course, in the United States, the Château Carbonnieux Blanc is very famous. It's very well known. It has been for a long time. But isn't that unusual for a winery in Bordeaux to be 50-50?
Very unusual, because all of our neighbors are mainly producer of red.
Yes.
And in the family of the classified growers of Grave, Carbonnieux represents for the white the half of the production of the 14 chateaux.
Oh, really?
It's really huge.
Your one chateau represents half of the white production of all 14 chateaux. Okay, that's interesting. Thomas, did you go to other chateaux in the Pessac-Léognan, or did you go see Smith-Old-Lafitte as well?
We did, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
So that district now, from your standpoint, it's becoming more popular in the world of wine? Is people,
I think
respecting the value of that?
I think the best whites of Bordeaux come from Pessac-Léognan. There's no doubt about that. There's definitely the terroir, and I think also the reds are just as good as the whites, and there's a really great properties. Château Carbonnieux is obviously one of them.
But some things that everybody forget. But in the 60s, Bordeaux was producing more white than red.
In the 60s?
With the part with Entre-deux-Mers. And later, in the 70s, we found the balance between the half of the production of Bordeaux was in white, the half was in red. And actually, the white of Bordeaux, so between the Entre-deux-Mers, the different appellation of Bordeaux, represent 8% of the production. So every year we saw the production of the white is coming down, and mainly in the basic white wine in the area between Entre-deux-Mers, Côte de Bourg. But the white of quality, yes, are produced mainly so in Pessac-Léognan.
I think so. The ones we taste here, clearly the better ones, and I don't see a whole, even from Thomas, I don't see a whole lot of other whites. We see a few, and because I have this Bordeaux club, I have a specifically for Bordeaux. I have a hard time finding the whites until today. Now we have some more to talk about. So tell me about it. The chateau is from the 12th century.
And 12th century, and at the end of the 13th centuries, we found a community of monks, and this area was called Carbonnieux. Before, we have a family of Carbonnieux, but they were not a wine producer that were living here, and so they died. They were buried in this area, and it was the name of this area. And the monk in 1292 were producing the first wine of Carbonnieux. So we have, and sometimes the story could be strange because the monk left the estate, and during close at 4th century, we have a family of lawyers called de Ferron. They were in charge of the estate, and also they were working in the Bordeaux Parliament until the beginning of the 18th centuries. 18th centuries, they have some family problems, some business problems. They decided to sold the estate, and it was the same monk, the same community of Benedictine coming from the Abbey Holy Cross, Sainte Croix de Bordeaux, that buy again the estate. They have been honored for a second period until the French Revolution. And at the French Revolution, whole was the property of the church, so have been sold to different owners. And our family arrived in 1956. It was my grandfather that bought the estate. After my father had been in charge, Anthony had been in charge of the estate, and now we're co-owner with my brother called Philibert.
So I have to go back to these monks. These guys are pretty smart.
Yes.
They were making good Bordeaux. They were making great Burgundy. I mean,
yes.
Maybe it was a good idea to be part of that Benedictine group.
And the Benedictine, or when we are talking about the moines Cisterciens in Burgundy, they imagine all the problems that we found now.
Yes.
And maybe also they were very good in marketing, because when the monks were owner of the estate, at this period we have a manager called Don Galea. Unfortunately for us, he was not so famous at Dom Pérignon in Champagne. I would like to, but it was not.
Oh, that's too bad. Yes, he should be. We should talk about him too.
And at the same period, the Sultan of Turkey had a favorite that was coming from Bordeaux. And this girl coming from Bordeaux wanted to drink some product from her area, and she wanted to drink some wine. And you know that the Islamic religion, so the Quran, forbids the consumption of alcohol.
Yes.
And the monk have a new idea, and he decided to sell to the Sultan of Turkey some, and we suppose that it was white wine, and due to the liquid was very clear, and he was putting on the label mineral water from Château Carbonnieux. And so the Sultan can offer some bottle to his favorite with no problem with the Quran. And one day he found one of these bottles. He took a glass and he was very surprised about the liquid that contained, and he said, I don't understand why French people want to make wine and they have a so delicious mineral water.
Now that is a very funny story.
And many times when I present the wines, people comment, I would like the water of Carbonnieux.
Yes. So the story must be known to some people.
That's very well known.
So, you know, the Turks, the Muslim, the Quran, everybody knows this is not a thing. I'll tell you a funny story, because many of the Turks come to Armenia because of the wine trade, and it's okay in Armenia to have a glass of wine, but not in Turkey. But so, how does that story known? Is it in the chronicles of Château Carbonnieux?
Yes, yes. All we were very well, and in Bordeaux, everybody knows this story. And when I present the wine,
that's really funny.
But never. I would like one day to present the wine in Istanbul. And
well, you know, I went to an Armenian restaurant recently in San Francisco. And I didn't recognize any of the wines except for a few Armenians and one, the Château Moussa, that's the Lebanese wine, right? But the rest there are many Turkish wines on this list. I was flabbergasted because of the Armenian restaurant, right? Because of our conflict. But I think that the community is growing in their wine knowledge and their appreciation for wine.
And for also, yes, it was 2 years ago. I was so in the wine fair called Provine in Düsseldorf, and I meet some Turkish, and I say, oh, one day I would like to organize something. And
that's so funny. That's really funny. So the monks were there, and you said that they were making their way down the left bank, and they ended up in Galicia. Which they had to cross the Pyrenees to do that.
Yes, and it's for the pilgrim. It's a road that they call Route de Compostelle in French. So, and the Spanish town is Santiago de Compostelle.
And so how far is this?
Oh, for us, it's in miles, it's close at 600 miles from Bordeaux. It's a long trip, and you have to have some stop, some rest, and.
I hope they took lots of Château Carbonnieux with them.
They do that. So in the past, but people now it's become very snobbish to say, "Oh, I walk on the road of Santiago de Compostelle," and it's like an art of life. And
that's interesting. That's really interesting. So your grandfather came along in 1956. What was he doing that interested him in wine?
Before our family is coming from Burgundy, from the area of Mâcon, and we were a wine merchant in Mâcon, so in the mid of the 19th century. And at this period, we have a part of France that it was in North Africa, and the grandfather of my grandfather crossed the Mediterranean and was making wine, so in the area of Oran in Algeria.
Interesting. Yeah. So you went from Burgundy to Bordeaux. Does anybody appreciate that?
And later, so my grandfather was a close friend of Nicolas Tary, and Nicolas bought Château Giscourt in the mid of the 50s, and he advised my grandfather and said, no, you have to come. Bordeaux is in crisis after the war. The market is very difficult. Come and invest with me in Bordeaux. And Nicolas bought Château Giscourt, and my grandfather had the opportunity to buy Carbonnieux at this time.
Wow,
but you have to imagine that it was another period, and so the wine market was very difficult. And we are located in the south part of Bordeaux, and at this period, so a large part of the vineyard disappeared. People were making more money with the urbanization than to continue to the culture of the vine. And
so after World War II, and I don't, I love history of the war, but I don't reflect on what happened in that part of France. Did it get uprooted? Did the chateaus, were they taken over by the Germans? What happened to the
Yes, the Germans were living in the chateau, but people continued to make wine because we have all the vintage. We have the 40, 41, 42, 45.
Yes.
And 45 was absolutely outstanding. And,
yes. Well, my father and I, 1993, we went to Vinexpo in Bordeaux. On the way to Vinexpo, we stopped in Paris, and we had dinner at Tour d'Argent because I had closed an escrow on I sold my grandmother's house for them. They were on vacation, and he says, I'm going to buy you dinner at Tour d'Argent. So we go, and he orders the 45 Lafite. Now, this is 1993, and it was like $3,000, okay? So that's my whole commission check, one bottle of wine, right? But the ullage came, and it was like that much. And so in French, my father speaks French. He says, you know, what happens if the wine's no good? The guy goes, that's too bad. It's your problem. So he said, no, I don't want to open it. And they got a Costa Esternel, 62 Costa Esternel. And, you know, we had a fabulous meal. But I find that fascinating that the 45 is such a great vintage, but it must be in short supply. Forget the age of the wine, but the fact that the vineyards weren't producing as much. The Germans were. Did they destroy any of the vineyards in the war? Did they just they like their wine, right?
No, they like the wine.
Yeah.
Yes,
you didn't make Riesling there, but that's okay. So your grandfather came in 1956.
50.
He had winemaking experience in Burgundy.
Not really, because more in at this period, so in Algeria, in the area of Oran, he was winemaker here, and he was making wine. But I think that the things were more simple than today, because also in the way to make the wine, in different things, they are really more simple.
Yes, sure. I mean, today's technologies.
And we saw also in the production of Bordeaux, 1 year you can have 20 hectoliters per hectare. The year after you have 60 after coming down. And now we know and we have more knowledge about the way to work in the vineyard. We have more knowledge in the way to work in the cellar. And we don't see whole difference that we had in the past between the two vintage. When we're talking, for example, about 45 or 47, everything the nature give very nice quality of grapes, and we suppose that during the Second World War, the material, the technique, also everything was very simple.
Yeah, the farming, the trellising, the harvesting, all by hand probably, right?
No idea of bacteria or things like that.
Right.
And due to the quality of grapes, they were making a great quality of wine.
That's so interesting. So today's estate is now managed with contemporary philosophies, knowledge, no irrigation, right?
Yes, first it's forbidden in our area. In the rule of production, irrigation is forbidden in
so how about the marketing of all this? You know, the world consumption of Bordeaux, is it up or down?
Yes, and so in our marketing, so us who are producer of wine, and we sell wine, you know, in future, what we call en primeur.
Yeah.
And we present the first week of April to the, if we can call that the wine business world.
Yes.
They came to the press, the actor of the distribution in the whole part of the world, the client of the wine merchant, the future vintage, and us we sell after to a group for Carbonnieux of more or less 100 different wine merchants or production.
I see, okay.
And Duclos is our main wine merchant. And for example, Croix de Carbonnieux is exclusive for Maison Duclos.
So how many chateaux in Bordeaux right now?
Do that.
10,000?
You have more that yes, a bit less between 7,000 8,000 chateaux,
okay.
But you have in fact they have interest in future. You have 200 chateaux. So
oh really?
I mean that, for example,
Yeah.
Union des Grands Crus, that is the top quality of Bordeaux.
Yes.
Bordeaux, it's more or less 120,000 hectares, and Union des Grands Crus represent between 5 to 6,000 hectares.
4%.
Yes, 4-5%, exactly.
Wow. Okay. So what I was trying to get to is like the competition in the world wine market for Bordeaux. I mean, in America, the competition has gotten ridiculously competitive. The consumer side of it, what I'm on that consumer side, but as well as the manufacturing side. I have people coming in here. Tomorrow is tasting day, and I have from 9:30, as Thomas knows, to 2:30. They come in, and more and more and more wine is coming in. And I was just wondering from the manufacturing standpoint, from a very particular part of Bordeaux and a very particular chateau, you know, the kind of competition that you're dealing with worldwide.
And Bordeaux, when we're talking about marketing, I think that the Bordeaux that export a large part are consumed on the local market.
Yes.
Is people that are traveling, and you find more the classified grows or family around that. And,
Yes. So when your father came in 1956, you bought the property. It was in bad repair.
Yes, it was.
The vineyards were
and
bad.
you have to at this period. So 56 froze. 57 year after froze.
Really?
No harvest.
That's not good unless you're making
and
ice wine.
The 3 first year when you arrive in Bordeaux, you have 3 black years. And my grandfather was depressive, and he said, "What I'm doing here? I have to continue."
So he
and after he continued,
had 3 bad vintages in a row.
and after also in the 60s, so the market become very complicated, because we are talking about 61 that was really a great vintage in Bordeaux, but it was a year of frost, and they were producing close at 15 hectoliters per hectare. It was very small
Very
crop.
low,
Yes,
wow. That's amazing. So when was his first sort of
62, 63,
62,
64, 65, 66 was good,
Yeah.
but 67, 68, 69, in the 60s you found 1, 2 great vintage, but 8 very average vintage.
Did he ever think, why did I do this?
And the market start to be organized, and Bordeaux start to sell the wine and become feel better in the 70s. In the 70s.
Isn't that interesting?
70s.
It's a really recent history.
Yes.
It's really not
and in the 80s, there is an explosion of Bordeaux. And,
well, because the
market-
California
and-
wine,
and-
you know, it hit the market in 1976, you know, with the Taste of Paris, but I'm interested to know that the Bordeaux was struggling until that point. But when did your father say at this point, like after his first 4 vintages that were really not doing very well, like?
No, they didn't know what they have to do, and one day they said, "No, are we going to resell the estate?" And
it must have been expensive to get the estate back to a producing estate. Was the house, I mean, the chateau itself?
Yes, and the things could be more simple so at this period, but also you have charge for the chateau, for the vineyard, for all the work of every day. And
was he married then? Was he married?
No. My father, when he arrived in Carbonnieux, he get married.
So he got married. Okay. So she married him even though he had a chateau.
I was born and I grew up in Carbonnieux.
Oh, you did? Okay,
yes.
Right. So when you were younger and you saw this, your father working so hard, was it something you wanted to do as well, or did you try to pursue something?
Maybe the love of the vineyard become with my grandfather, because during the summer holiday, I love to be with him.
Yes.
And my father was more in the technique, was more working so in the cellar, in the way to transform the grapes, making the wine. And my grandfather loved to be in the vineyard. And certainly it was with my grandfather during the summer. I loved to see with him. And I remember, so we saw that the climate changed, because when we start to go in school, it was always after the 15th of September. And always we were starting the first Sauvignon Blanc after mid-September. And when we were young, when we were kids, one of our pleasure was to coming in the cellar to drink the first juice in the tank.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. So that's interesting, though.
And now, every year we start the harvest between end of August, beginning of September. And
so is that because of climate change?
I think the climate change. Yes.
It's just getting hotter.
And so the Sauvignon Blanc become riper faster, and always we start.
But then you had frost, you said, a couple of years.
Yes, and I think that the nature also have some excess.
Yes.
And we have some more storm, more wind, and we had a terrible frost 2 years ago.
That's
in 1917.
When we were there in 2018, we left Pauillac May 23rd. We were going to Nice to go to Monaco for the Grand Prix, and behind us came a hailstorm into Bordeaux.
Yes.
And I think it was Entre deux Mers
Entre deux Mers, yes. Close from us, because you have some in Pessac-Léognan, you have some impact in Pessac-Léognan.
Yeah.
And after the Entre deux Mers, the area of Blaye, and now the people from all this area, due to the frost and the yield, have some economic problem.
What's interesting to me is that you could have hail at the same time, when it gets to harvest, we're harvesting earlier because of climate change. So now you're in the middle of harvest now. Today's September 9th.
Yes, we have started the first Sauvignon Blanc 1 week and a half ago, and for 10 more days, in 10 days we will finish the white. And when we finish the white, we start immediately with the first red, with the first Merlot. But you see also in our experience of harvest, I saw that from 1 year to another year, having the right ripeness for the white, every year it's okay.
Yeah.
And also due to the size of the estate, sometimes I have between 35, 40 different styles of white wine. I mean that, for example, the Sauvignon Blanc from the warm part of the estate on the warm soil, on gravel, will have a different expression than the one from the cool part where we have more limestone and clay. And from 1 year to another year, we found a style, a signature, and identity in the chateau. I think there is, for example, a styles for Carbonnieux, but there is a styles we are talking about Smith Lafitte or Domaine de Chevalier. They have their own identity for the white. And on one way, for me, for the white, I don't care a lot about the vintage. I found a signature in the way to make the wine, as you can find, in Champagne, with, for example, with Bill Carsamon, with Paul Roger, or Roderer. They have their own identity, their own way to make the wine. And for the red, we need really a very nice end of season. We're talking about the whole vintage, for example, the 45 or 47. But here we need really a nice end of season to have the right ripeness for the Cabernet Sauvignon.
The whites are very expressive of the terroir. I mean, the mineralities in the citrus really.
And first, it's important when you are drinking wine, I don't want to make wine, sometimes over-ripe or over-extract or over-woody with high level of alcohol. On one way, we are losing our identity. When you are coming and drinking the wine, you must find a signature, an identity, a styles.
I agree. I agree. It's
Pessac-Léognan must drink like Pessac-Léognan. If you are making other way to make the wine, when I say over-ripe, you don't know, in the blind tasting, you don't know where these wines are done.
Yes, that's a very important thing. Actually, last night during this event, somebody told me about a party they went to recently. Under normal circumstances, it would be pretty hard to do. And what they did is they took a bottle of Armenian wine, which is Arani, which is a grape that grows nowhere else, and they took a Bordeaux, and they took a Napa cap, and they brown bagged them, and they asked the guests to guess which is which. Now, it would, I think, for us, reasonably simple to do based on they're very terroir-driven wines. We could figure that out. But for the regular person that's drinking wine, it would be hard to do. And then to analyze the specifics of a Pessac-Léognan white, I think a good Bordeaux drinker could figure this out, right? Because in this particular case, the minerality and the structure is like no other Bordeaux Blanc I've tasted recently, right? So, but there's an interesting comment that was made to me by a sommelier recently, and he felt that if we took the Napa Valley, and we haven't even talked about Napa yet since you worked there, we'll get to that right now. He thinks there should be a left side of the valley and a right side of the valley. And when you mentioned that there are parts of the vineyard that are cooler than warmer than others, and they create different types of grapes that create different character in the wine, he's like, I think they ought to cut, the Rutherford right in half and Oak Knoll and there's two different sides. But let's go back to that.
But you're right. I remember, I tell you that I was making wine in Napa Valley in 1987.
Yes.
And at this period, Napa wanted to make wine very opulent. They are watching about the alcohol, the color, the tannin, the wood, and more they are working on the elegance.
That's right. You're right.
And now they are talking about terroir.
That's a very good point.
And recently they are talking about terroir.
Yeah, it's kind of recent, isn't it?
I found that recent. I remember I come more or less every 2 years in Napa Valley, but I saw year after year the changement in the mind, in the way to make the wine, and now they are talking about terroir. When you are coming in Robert Mondavi, you say Coquelin.
Yeah, right. That's true. That's interesting. So wait, how long you were there? 1 year making wine for Robert.
1 year
with
one
Robert
year.
Mondavi. And the family still owned it.
I was working in a small vineyard at this part. It was called Domaine de Napa, and it was a Frenchman called Michel Perret.
Yeah, Michel Perret.
Michel Perret is the brother of Geneviève that was in charge of the vinification. Geneviève Janssen in charge of the vinification with Robert Mondavi, and Michel sold, and it's become now Alpha Omega.
Oh, that's interesting. Jean-Noël, Monsieur Jean-Noël, he owned Château Potel.
Yes, and Jean-Noël was making the vinification with Michel.
Was he really? Okay.
Jean-Noël Fourmeau.
Jean-Noël.
He's in Bordeaux, actually, Jean-Noël.
Is he? J'ai acheté le
Château Potel.
Zonfandil, you say it's French Zonfandil.
He's a nice guy. It's a
very nice guy. But I spoke with him recently because we were in Napa, and I called him to see if he was available. We would just run in there and say hi, but he wasn't around. Okay, so I think that's an interesting concept, a point that you're making about the terroir of Napa. Because up until not that long ago, they were just known for that giant fruit bomb in the middle, lots of opulence, and they are becoming more elegant and more interesting. I had one last night from Yao Ming, the basketball player, the Chinese basketball player. He owns an estate in Napa, and it was a Meritage. It was a Bordeaux blend. It's actually all 5 grapes, but it was a little rough and a little too opulent still. But I'm happy to hear that Napa is looking at its terroir, because from Carneros up to Calistoga, it's going to be a completely different terroir.
And I like the one to Napa make in the
hillside.
Yes.
I have a Burgess Hillside Vineyard cab in stock right now, and it's fabulous wine. Okay, so now did you go to school for wine?
Yes.
You did?
I learned at the Bordeaux University.
Bordeaux University, which is a very famous school for wine.
At this time, you have Bordeaux and Dijon, a little bit in Montpellier, but Bordeaux and Dijon, in this period, it was a two-part where you were learning winemaking.
And so is it winemaking or just enology or just farming?
Enology.
And so you got out and you went right to the family?
First, you have to learn 2 years in the scientist university, and after 2 years at the university to the winemaking.
And you have a brother?
I have a brother, yes.
And two brothers or one brother?
And one brother, but one sister, but she is not involved in the wine business.
She's not in the wine business. But she drinks it.
She drinks.
She enjoys
of course.
My brother made this. She said. So what's your brother do there?
No, he's more in the production.
In production. Okay. Now I have a brother who lives in Lincoln, Nebraska. We are totally different, but we're 6 years apart. How far apart are you with your brother?
We have. I'm from 1963 and from 1970, so we have
7 years.
7 years of difference.
Do you get along?
And
do you get along? Do you work together well?
Yes.
Oh, good. That's great.
Because we are different way to work, but he loves to be so in the vineyard, watching what is happening, and I don't like that.
You don't. You want to talk to people and see what's going on in the marketplace.
But I like more and more, the life of our bottle outside of our cellar.
It's a fascinating lifestyle anyway, and people. I think what you mentioned it earlier when we were talking about Napa Valley, and a lot of money has come into Napa. So either you were a surgeon and you did well, or you were the guy that built the freeways. Those guys always made a lot of money, and they all want to go to Napa and become winemakers and think they're going to retire, right? And what happens? They work harder than they used to, right?
Yeah, we believe that wine is doing everything. It's the nature. It's doing very easily, but we have to work hard. I mean, in the vineyard or in our business.
Why do we think that? Why do we think that we change careers into something as we think it's an ethereal? I'm going to go back to my roots. I'm going to learn how to farm. And then we get there and we realize this is very complicated.
Yes, I think that when you are drinking the wine, you think that it's pleasure of life.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
when we saw the way to make the wine, it's really.
So when you're harvesting today,
and people that came and visit us say, "Oh, I didn't believe any time that it was so hard to do to make wine."
And sell it. You're going to sell it after you make it. You can't just sit there.
We have, of course, an organization in Bordeaux because we are more professional to make wine, and we sell our wine to professional of the distribution.
Yes, right.
Like Maison Duclos.
Which is a great organization. I have to say that.
Thank you.
When you're going to pick these grapes, you're picking them now. Are you tasting the grapes? Are we checking the skin thickness? Are we checking the yeast? What are we doing to make sure it's time to pick?
But we make we are in control of maturity many times, working in the vineyard, testing the grapes, and one day we decided to make the picking. But you see, after the vinification, and many times when I describe a wine, it will be with who remember, or in the barrel, and I like a lot during the winter to taste the wine coming from a different part of the estate, and after to imagine the final blendage.
It's interesting because
and for the red, it's the same thing. My first contact with the wine will be during the vinification, and many times I will describe a vintage due to my impress, due to the sensations that I will have, or at the end of the harvest, or at the end of the aging in barrel. And sometimes, we are making the bottling, so coming from the barrel to the tank to the bottle, and the wine, like a stress, is closed, and I didn't recognize the wine.
Yes, that's hard.
And I have to wait 1, 2, 3, 4 years, and sometimes more
it comes
to rediscover the wine.
I don't think people realize how difficult that is from the marketing of a wine. In Napa, 1989 was a very tough vintage. The wines were very rough, very tannic. And the 1990s were beautiful, soft, and deliverable after they were bottled. Now the 1990 is on the shelf, and the 89s are in the warehouse. 89s come around. What do you do with them? You can't put them back on the shelf ahead of after the 1990s, so you have to sell them through different means, right? And I think that's an important part of the consumer doesn't know that. They just go to the shelf and they buy a wine. But I made a lot of money on the 89s because they came around and they were really, really good. Yeah. So and they're very inexpensive that way. It's interesting. It's an interesting part of the business that people don't understand. It's agriculture.
But it's very good because we are very critic in wine because we know very well, and it's important also when we're talking about the travel, the information that I will give on the market about the way to to consume the wine. But sometimes when the wine is too young, it's too tannic, it's not pleasant. But sometimes you have to taste this wine every year. Sometimes it's good to buy cases of wine.
That's right. That's what I try to tell people.
To test one bottle every year.
Yes.
And you have the good bottle on the right time, you are making a good business.
Do you think that the consumer, and I think this is an important part of it, but look, you've nailed it on the head. This is my business. I would love everyone to buy one case of wine of everything, right? And taste it along the way. I'd be in good shape if that was the case, not one bottle, right? Yeah. But it's an important thing to learn. When I tell people, if you want to learn about wine, at least 6 bottles, and just this is how you learn to taste and evolve and see what happens to a wine when it ages. I believe this is the case. And maybe in your travels you see this, maybe you don't. Maybe it's only in America, but there's a whole bunch of really bad wine out there right now, and I think that the consumer is getting tired of this bad wine, and they're starting to understand the experience of good wine, at least well-made wine, and this idea of terroir.
Yeah. But you saw, so I saw in the past, people were used to drink wine from their area of production.
Yes.
People from Bordeaux are drinking Bordeaux.
Right.
People from Languedoc are drinking Languedoc. Or from Burgundy are drinking. And when we export wine, we have also to export an education to the consumption.
That's right.
When we are talking before, Bordeaux was very close about no tourism. To visitor came to the estate. Also coming from in the estate, it's a way to learn the consumption of wine and our perception of the wine and the information that we can give for the education of the consumption of the wine. Wine become more sophisticated. We have the one we're talking about the different area of production. They have their own identity, personality.
Yes.
It's important to educate the consumer.
I tell the story all the time. We'll wrap this up. But when I go home and my wife says I want a glass of wine, I actually have to sort of think about the mood she's in, what we're having for dinner, what we had last night to taste, because I want to choose something she's going to experience something. And wine needs to be an experience. And the experience is not, I bought this for $10. The experience is the story behind Château Carbonnieux or the story behind your grandfather.
And we like to talk the blend between the history and on one way and the technology and the way to make wine.
So here's a thought. You can take this with you. And I learned this from a young female winemaker, or she actually is a director of couture for an Armenian winery and an Argentinian winery. But what other product in the world, maybe a car. Now, a car has this potential character, but what other product in the world can you take from, in this case, Bordeaux, bring it to across the world, place it on the desk and say, this is what we're about. This is what I am. Because there's so much inside that bottle to explain the soil, the ground, the history, everything you just talked about. And there's no other product you can do that. You can't do it with a radish or an apricot or a car, a 1958 Maserati. Okay, that tells you a lot, right? That's a pretty cool car, right? But other than that, what other product is there that explains the history and the value of the location that the wine came from?
And of course, I apologize about that, but when we're talking about wine, we have real passion about
yes. It's passion.
Yes,
of course, it's passion, but
passion, terroir.
We must be on one way. We must be a little bit
uniqueness of everywhere where wine is produced.
Yes.
I think it's.
You're
right. You're right.
On one way, we must be a little bit crazy to make wine.
Well, I brought that up with the guy last night, the Frenchman I was speaking to. I said he retired already. He sold his company and he got into the wine business like we were talking about. I said, did you want to lose money on purpose, or what were you thinking? So I appreciate the time today, Eric. I know that you have a busy day today, and we want to bring in some Château Carbonnieux for the clients that watch this and listen to this. So we'll bring in a couple of the vintages here. I certainly want to feature one of the whites in the club as well. So we'll talk about that. But it's been a great pleasure. I hope you have a safe travels. Bon voyage.
Merci beaucoup. And thank you to invite us, and it was a great pleasure.
Avec plaisir. Merci.
Mon plaisir.
À bientôt.
Merci.